Paige's words hung in the kitchen air, heavy and final, completely at odds with the warm, comforting smell of the cinnamon coffee cake I had just pulled from the oven. "Preston just isn't comfortable with you there," she mumbled, staring intensely into her coffee mug instead of meeting my eyes. "His family is very particular. You just don't fit into that crowd, Mom. Honestly, it would be better for everyone if you didn't come." It was a Tuesday afternoon. Outside, the sun was pouring into the backyard of the very house where I'd worked double shifts for 15 years after my husband died, just to make sure Paige never went without. I looked at my daughter. At 62, I've learned how to read people's silences and body language. Paige was picking nervously at the hem of her blouse, waiting for the explosion. She expected tears, yelling, or for me to fall to my knees and beg not to be cut out of the most important day of her life. But I didn't cry. Panic and drama have never paid a single bill or solved a single problem. Preston, her fiancé, had been treating me with barely disguised condescension for months. My opinions on the wedding prep were met with polite smirks. My suggestions were wholly ignored. And now, barely a month before the wedding, I was officially being voted off the island. I knew exactly whose idea this really was. Preston wanted a picture-perfect magazine spread wedding to impress his business partners, and a working-class widowed mother-in-law didn't exactly match the imported floral arrangements. "Don't take it the wrong way," Paige added quickly, clearly unnerved by my silence. "It's our big day. Preston just wants everything to flow without any tension." I felt a cold sting in my chest, but my breathing stayed perfectly even. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized that the little girl I'd raised had chosen to cater to a man's arrogance rather than respect her own mother. I offered a small smile. It wasn't forced. In that moment, I actually felt an invisible chain snap right off my neck. It was a smile that completely derailed her. "That's all the confirmation I needed," I replied, my voice completely steady. "No accusations, no guilt trips." Paige blinked, completely thrown off. "You're not mad?" she asked, almost sounding offended by my lack of a meltdown. "It's your wedding," I told her softly, picking up the cooling coffee cake and moving it to the counter without offering her a slice. "You two need to feel comfortable." As I watched her walk out the front door, deeply confused by my reaction, I headed straight for the small desk in the living room. I knew exactly what I was going to do next. The next morning, I poured my usual cup of coffee and sat down at my laptop. The early light was streaming through the window, and my mind felt incredibly clear. I hadn't spent the night tossing and turning or crying into my pillow. The logic was simple. If I wasn't welcome at the family celebration, there was absolutely no reason for me to continue being its primary financial sponsor. I logged into my banking portal. Months ago, I had set up a dedicated checking account specifically for the wedding. Paige and Preston loved to brag about their independence to his family, but the reality was that the massive deposits were coming straight from my savings. With a few methodical clicks, I canceled the automatic wire transfers scheduled for the end of the week. The high-end catering company and the boutique florist were suddenly cut off. Then I transferred the remaining balance, thousands of dollars I had quietly set aside as a surprise to cover her custom dress and their honeymoon deposit, right back into my retirement account. It felt like dropping a backpack full of bricks that I'd been hauling around for the last year. Next, I picked up my phone and called the credit card company. I had given Paige an authorized user card on my Platinum account for little emergency expenses during the planning process. The customer service rep was lovely. In less than 3 minutes, my daughter's card was permanently deactivated. I didn't feel angry. I just felt a profound sense of clarity. If they wanted to be exclusive independent adults, they could foot the bill for that exclusivity. I finished my coffee and walked upstairs to the guest room. Paige and Preston crashed here almost every weekend. His expensive golf jackets and her designer shoes took up half the closet. I carefully folded their belongings and packed them into 2 large cardboard boxes. My house was no longer their free weekend bed and breakfast. The first move was made, and the best part was the absolute silence in which I'd executed it. Tomorrow, Paige had her final dress fitting at the most expensive bridal boutique downtown. Reality was about to come knocking. The pounding on my front door started just before noon. Before I could even get the door all the way open, Paige pushed her way into the hallway. Her face was flushed red with anger, her eyes wide. Preston trailed right behind her, standing stiff with a scowl on his face, trying to look intimidating. Paige was holding the credit card out like it was the murder weapon in a crime show. My card was declined. She practically shouted, skipping a hello entirely. Right in front of the boutique owner and Preston's mom. It was the most humiliating experience of my life. And then the caterer called Preston to say the final payment bounced. What is going on with the bank? I closed the book I was reading, adjusted my glasses, and looked at them both with total serenity. There's nothing wrong with the bank, Paige. I canceled the payments and blocked the card. She froze. The silence in the hallway was so thick you could cut it with a knife. But why? She stammered, all her aggressive momentum evaporating. We're getting married in a month. You promised you'd cover that half of the budget. We'll lose the venue without that money. I smiled with zero hostility. I promised to help pay for a family celebration. Yesterday, you made it crystal clear that I'm not welcome at it. I respect your decision to exclude me, so your groom is comfortable, I said, shooting a brief glance at Preston, who immediately looked away. But I don't see any logical reason to keep funding a party I'm not invited to. Preston stepped forward, clearing his throat. Valerie, this is unacceptable. You're trying to blackmail us into inviting you. It's incredibly immature behavior. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood up and looked him dead in the eye. No, Preston. Blackmail implies that I want something from you. I don't want to go to your wedding. You actually did me a favor by relieving me of the obligation. I'm just organizing my finances. If you want a luxury country club event, you're going to have to pay for it yourselves. It's really that simple. I pointed to the 2 cardboard boxes sitting by the door. By the way, I packed up your things from the guest room. You won't be spending your weekends here anymore. I need the space. They both just stood there speechless. They had come in expecting a desperate negotiation. Instead, they hit a brick wall. The tension in the room was suffocating, but I didn't budge an inch. Preston, trying desperately to regain control of the situation, puffed out his chest. Fine, he said, his voice tight. If that's how you want to play it, Paige and I are leaving. We don't need your money. We'll figure it out ourselves. Grab the boxes, babe. Paige picked up the boxes, her hands physically shaking. She was clearly terrified of the avalanche of expenses about to bury them, but she was too proud to beg in front of her fiancé. Before they could walk out the door, I held up a hand. One more thing. Preston, you've been using my garage for 4 months to store your expensive tools, your motorcycle parts, and all those giant wooden props you bought for the reception. I need it emptied out. Preston rolled his eyes and scoffed. I don't have time to move all that right now. I work full-time and I'm trying to salvage a wedding you just ruined. I'll get it after the honeymoon. You have 48 hours, I replied, using the same flat tone one might use to read the weather forecast. After that, I am no longer responsible for what happens to that stuff. You are unbelievable, Preston muttered, pushing the front door open. You wouldn't dare touch my things. You're just throwing a tantrum. Let's go, Paige. I closed the door behind them and slid the deadbolt into place. I let out a long, deep breath. The quiet of my own home had never felt so sweet. For years, I had compromised my space, my time, and my bank account just to keep the peace. I thought loving my daughter meant quietly enduring her partner's disrespect. I was wrong. That same afternoon, I went down to the garage. Preston had monopolized 3/4 of the space with crates of designer string lights, heavy wooden arches, and tool chests. He was entirely convinced I was bluffing banking on the old version of Valerie, who always bent over backward to avoid conflict. I pulled out my phone and found the number for Marcus, a reliable neighbor who ran a local moving and freight business. I called him up, and we agreed on a price. Preston was about to learn that my boundaries were no longer just gentle suggestions. Exactly 48 hours passed. Not a single phone call from Preston, not a single text from Paige trying to coordinate picking up the garage items. They were playing a game of chicken, assuming my ultimatum was totally empty. At 9 a.m. on Friday, Marcus pulled up in his box truck with 2 brawny guys. I opened the garage and gave them very simple instructions. Everything on this right side goes to the address on this sticky note. Be careful with it, but make sure nothing is left behind. In less than an hour, my garage was completely empty. I could actually see the concrete floor that had been hidden for months. Marcus drove across town to the cramped, overpriced apartment complex, where Paige and Preston lived. Since they didn't have a garage or a storage unit, Marcus unloaded everything neatly into the only space available, Preston's single assigned parking spot, stacking boxes of decor and motorcycle tires right in front of his leased sedan. My phone rang at 1 p.m. It was Paige. I answered it while watering my hydrangeas. "Mom, this is insane!" She shrieked, the sound of city traffic blaring in the background. "The building manager just threatened Preston with a massive fine because his parking spot is full of junk. We're trying to shove a giant wooden arch onto our balcony. I gave you 48 hours, Paige," I replied mildly. "Preston's belongings are not my responsibility anymore, just like I'm not your responsibility at the wedding. It's simply about boundaries." "You're ruining everything." We don't have the cash for the venue penalty fees, and now Preston is screaming at me. Preston's temper is something you need to manage. You chose your new family. I suggest you guys start working as a team. I hung up the phone before the sobbing could start. I didn't mute it. I just set it face down on the patio table. The cycle was broken. I was no longer going to absorb the anxiety they created through their own bad choices and disrespect. My garden needed water, and my plants didn't demand that I disappear just to make someone else comfortable. By the weekend, the sudden lack of my checkbook started causing real collateral damage to their plans. Paige, desperate to save face, started calling the extended family. Her version of the story painted her as a tragic victim. She told my brothers and cousins that I had completely lost my mind, cut off their funding in a jealous rage, and was trying to sabotage her happiness. Sunday night, my phone rang. It was my brother, Uncle Russell Page's absolute favorite uncle. "Valerie, what the hell is going on?" he asked, skipping the small talk. "Paige is crying her eyes out. She says you're bankrupting them right before the wedding." I sat back in my favorite armchair and laid out the facts without a single ounce of drama in my voice. Paige and Preston sat me down and uninvited me from the wedding because Preston doesn't feel comfortable having me there. "Russell, I accepted their decision. But as I'm sure you can understand, I am not going to pay thousands of dollars for catering and florals at a party where I'm considered a nuisance. So I pulled my funding." There was a very long silence on the other end of the line. Russell is a practical man, a retired accountant who has zero tolerance for nonsense. "Let me get this straight. They uninvited you, but still expected you to foot the bill." He asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. "Exactly." "Got it. Have a good night, Val." I didn't have to do anything else. Russell didn't keep the secret. The naked truth spread through our side of the family in less than 24 hours. Nobody called to scold me or beg me to reconsider. Instead, the quiet consequences began. On Tuesday, Paige posted a passive-aggressive status on Facebook about the betrayal of the people who are supposed to support you. But the reality was that my aunts, uncles, and cousins quietly started changing their RSVPs to no. If the mother of the bride wasn't classy enough to be at the reception, they certainly weren't going to be used as seat fillers just to applaud the groom. Without my financial backing and with my side of the family tactfully bowing out, the ostentatious 400-guest wedding began to collapse in on itself. 2 weeks before the wedding, the stress had completely hollowed the couple out. The luxury country club canceled their reservation when the final payment didn't arrive. They had to scramble and rent a modest Italian restaurant out in the suburbs, losing all their previous deposits. The expensive gold foil parchment invitations were hurriedly corrected with a mass email. One afternoon, I found Paige sitting on my front porch steps. She was alone without Preston there to act as her bodyguard. She looked pale and thoroughly exhausted. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice small. I unlocked the door and let her step into the living room. I didn't offer her a drink. "Mom, things are really bad." She started wringing her hands. "Preston's family is furious about the venue change. Our friends are bailing. If you help us pay for the honeymoon and clear the debt with the restaurant, Preston says you can come to the church, just for the ceremony. Then you can go home." I just stared at her, genuinely marveling at the sheer audacity of the offer. They wanted to rent me out as a second-class guest in exchange for my life savings. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. "No thank you, Paige. I'm really not interested in buying a ticket to the church." She burst into tears, finally releasing all the pent-up frustration. "It's not fair. You're my mother. You're supposed to support me unconditionally. Love is unconditional. Respect is not," I told her firmly. "You and Preston set the rules for how you wanted to treat me. I am simply playing by your rules. You're adults. You'll survive." I walked over to the kitchen island and picked up a glossy brochure that had arrived in the mail that morning. It was from a travel agent. "Besides, I already have plans for that weekend." Paige looked down at the brochure. It was for a 5-day luxury wellness retreat in Maui, Hawaii. All the color drained from her face as she realized that the money meant for her tropical honeymoon was now fully funding my peace of mind. She turned around and walked out of the house without saying another word. The actual week of the wedding arrived wrapped in a thick fog of resignation from Paige. The spectacular networking event Preston had envisioned had devolved into a rushed, modest dinner. I heard through the grapevine from Russell that they had to downgrade the menu to roast chicken and switch to a cash bar. I meanwhile was in my bedroom packing my suitcase. I folded my swimsuits, packed my favorite books, and laid out a couple of nice evening dresses. My shoulders felt lighter than they had since my husband passed away. For the first time in decades, I wasn't running around trying to put out someone else's emotional fires. On Thursday, 2 days before the ceremony, the doorbell rang. It was Paige. She needed to pick up some old birth certificates and tax documents for a name change form. She stepped into the foyer and immediately spotted my hard-shell suitcase sitting by the door, the airline tag already looped around the handle. She stopped dead in her tracks, staring at the luggage. Her eyes were a messy mix of regret and stubbornness. "You're really leaving," she whispered. "My flight is first thing Saturday morning." I confirmed, handing her the manila folder with her paperwork. There was a heavy, tense silence. I knew she was waiting for me to cave at the absolute last second. To cancel my trip, write her a massive check, and rush to the mall to buy a dress so I could stand beside her. But that version of Valerie was gone. "I hope the weather is nice on your trip," she finally choked out, hugging the folder to her chest. I hope you have a beautiful day on Saturday. I replied, and I meant it. I didn't wish her ill. I just refused to be the collateral damage of her relationship anymore. I opened the front door for her. There were no tearful hugs, no 11th hour apologies. Just the cold, hard reality of consequences. Paige walked out to her car with her head down. I shut the door, threw the deadbolt, and poured myself a glass of Pinot Noir. My peace finally belonged to me and me alone. Dajay la fain ban ngan vasus ti hon kua chuang chin. Va chuang muai bang tieng an nahung van gyung guyen juoch kumksus va thong jiep qua kawa shuyen. I woke up before the sun on Saturday, and by the time Paige was scheduled to walk down the aisle, I was soaking in a geothermal pool overlooking the Pacific in Maui. Later that evening, I checked my phone just long enough to see a text from Uncle Russell. He'd gone to the ceremony but skipped the reception, calling the wedding a quiet disaster full of whispering guests and a furious groom. I didn't feel any malicious joy, just a fleeting wave of pity for the prison of appearances Paige had voluntarily locked herself into. I put my phone away, headed down to the resort restaurant, and ordered fresh scallops and a glass of champagne. I quietly toasted to cutting the cord. While they were eating dry chicken in a room thick with resentment, I was savoring my freedom. It was, without a doubt, the best weekend of my life. I flew back home on Wednesday with a renewed spirit, my house finally feeling like a true sanctuary. The next morning, Paige's car screeched into my driveway. She stumbled up to the porch, looking completely exhausted, her eyes swollen. I opened the front door, but didn't step back to invite her in. "It was a complete disaster, Mom," she blurted out. "Our credit cards are maxed out. His mom complained the whole time, and Preston and I are fighting over how to pay rent. We need help." I looked at her with genuine warmth, but my boundary was absolute. "I will always love you, Paige. But Preston is your husband now, and you two are a team. I have total faith you'll work hard and pay off what you owe. That's just part of being an adult." Before she could fully process that the safety net was gone, I added softly, "I had the locks changed while I was away, by the way. Just give me a call before you visit next time so I can put on a pot of coffee." I gave her a kind nod and firmly closed the door. As her car backed out of the driveway, I walked into my kitchen and looked out at my sun-drenched yard. I had lost a fantasy, but I'd gotten myself back, and that was worth every single penny.